guiding you on the path today. For those of you who don't know, I am associated in some small way to the puppetry community. My wife is a professor of theater and her specialty is puppetry. And Anita thought that this was a funny joke, in part because of my hair, and in part because Anita's the future. The future is here today. So we're going to guide you on a small path of reviewing very briefly some of our perspectives of yesterday. And then we're going to go into at least some reflections that Anita and I have been having over the past several weeks, several months, several years, really, about the future of scholarly communications. And then we're going to invite you all to have a conversation at your table. So if you're sitting alone or sitting with just one or two people, maybe when we start having that conversation, you want to consolidate with your neighbors to have a conversation based on the questions that Deb posed yesterday. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Anita to give her thoughts on yesterday.
Thank you so much, Todd. Can I have a show of hands? Who was not here yesterday? Okay, brilliant. Nobody. Okay, excellent. So then I won't go into any great depth. Just to say, we heard a lot of things from a lot of people. I have heard the drink from the fire hose analogy. People said, you certainly threw a lot at us. But we did hear, and that was the idea, from many stakeholders outside of the publishing community. So the goal really of the conference was to say, what will the future look like? But let's not only navel gaze. Let's not only look at it from our own publishing perspective, but let's ask the people that we serve. And next to that, it was clear that there are a number of reports that are being compiled at the moment, which does seem to be a big shift. It feels a little bit like when the web first started, which I'm old enough to remember, in that AI really has this potential to entirely change and overturn our industry. So we did see quite a few reports. So we heard, actually, there were 4 special reports. There was the STM Future Trends report, not the tech trends, but the trends report. We heard a report on the second digital transformation of scholarly publishing. There was a report on the Research Office of the Future, and there was the Librarian of the Future report. So we saw 4 reports. And we also heard from 5 different stakeholder groups. We heard from society publishers, so those are sort of us, but a specific type of us. We heard from a funder. We heard from a STEM researcher, a social science researcher, and a journal editor. And here's a quick 3-minute summary of that day. So what do our stakeholders actually want? Dr. Berkowitz, who is a NSF person, funder, was talking about a glorious future of science. In the end, what he was saying was, please take better care of data. The talk by the STEM researcher gave me as a physicist, I completely got the analogy of friction. And the things that she was asking for was really to say, you have different systems, and it's very hard to move between the different publishing platforms. And again, I'm old enough to remember when we started all those online publishing platforms, and it was always the idea that it would be frictionless. But I think it's very good and very honest for researchers to say, hey, you know what? There's still a lot of friction between your platforms. It's a hassle for me to have to go and move from one to the other, and it's not easy to combine information from them. The reference management systems, I think, is another thing that if you'd gone 20 years in the past, we would have certainly thought we would have nailed by now, but yet we haven't. And another thing that she noted was the hassle in formatting references and things like that. So these are not, exciting future-looking things, but they are causing a lot of friction, a lot of pain, a lot of sorrows for the researchers in the field. Sharing of documents, not having good group editing tools, etc. So I thought that was very enlightening, that really a lot of the things that we somehow overlook are very much at the basis of the experience of the researcher. Then I guess we had our epistemic behinds handed to us by a social science researcher who, again, said a number of things saying, how are you going to do, what are you going to do with peer review? How are you going to solve this replication crisis? How are you going to democratize knowledge? And what is the publishing industry going to do about lower trust in science? Verifying truths in a post-truth world, isn't that your job as well? I think it was, again, a very interesting, exciting sort of view from somebody who isn't in this industry and who really, really pulled out a couple of the key things there. And then the view from the editor, who painted a picture of a beautiful sort of holographic virtual reality way to navigate through images, which again, I think, having been in this industry for so long, is something that we envisaged would have been commonplace at this point. And that was one of the comments. Well, that all could be here. Yeah, but it's not. So I think part of what I found interesting in the views from the stakeholders yesterday was that many of the things they discussed they wanted in a future are things that we had hoped we would have by now, but we haven't sorted out. And I just think that calls for some reflection on today. Like, some of the things that we need to start figuring out is making their more frictionless connections, making things simply simpler, sorting out data, and being better, and enabling the rendering of data, data visualization, interactions with data, et cetera. So the other part of the day was there were these 4 reports on the future, and the first conclusion is everyone's doing them. It's the cool thing to do. Ask people in your community what they want in this post-AI truth world. And the first report, the image which you have then all seen, which I think we all thought was quite exciting, was this scenarios report with the extensive, limited, anticipative, and inadequate scenarios that we all kind of had a really good discussion about, and I thought was very helpful, at the very least, to prompt a lot of discussion. I'm sort of grouping the report with different categories. Lots of people, not so many people, futuristic and realistic, and kind of classified the reports that we saw. So the Clarivate report, which I thought was very interesting on the research office, what I noted there was the fact that the research offices didn't think, I don't know if you can read it, but artificial intelligence is like not going to be such a big deal in their world. I think we all, or many people that I spoke to noted that was a bit surprising. So it was a big survey, but it maybe was more realistic than futuristic. The report from Ithaca was very interesting in talking about how do we, when we're moving into the second digital paradigm. You didn't, by the way, explain the second, but I'm assuming it's the AI paradigm, but I'm not sure. Maybe you can comment on that. So there are a lot of overlaps with the STM Trends report, the challenges and opportunities of the workforces and connections, emerging communities. So I think the community theme is another one that really came up for me. There are many active communities, and it's very important that we as publishers do interact with research offices, with libraries, with infrastructure providers. And this seamlessness, this lack of friction is also important in those connections. And first but last, the STM Trends report from Hilco, which I think was a very exciting glimpse into a future. I really loved the Mentimeter, where people said it's either here already or it's never going to be here. I think that honestly merits a lot of discussion, and it might be something you want to discuss in your table today. The people who say it's never going to be there, are they saying that because the technology is not there, or because they think the willingness isn't there? Does it have something to do with our business models? Let's ask ourselves some really interesting open questions about why certain people thought that these things would not occur. So those were just a couple of my notes. We will start to talk about what we think the future is like, but first, a few notes from Todd.
So thanks, Anita. And that's a fantastic job to summarize an entire day worth of thoughts and ideas and presentations into 10-ish minutes. I will try to do my best to come up with a few more ideas. The theme of this conference is focused on the future, and there's a great quote about the future is here, it's just not widely distributed. And I'm sensing there's a resonation, it's resonating presently And there were themes coming through yesterday that, again, like Anita, I kind of recall the early days of the internet. And I'm sort of feeling in many ways like this is the 90s coming back. And there's a lot of emotions that were expressed both in the presentations and in the questions yesterday. A sense of opportunity, a sense of new business opportunities, new discovery opportunities in science, that there's new tools and approaches to how we manage information, how we think about information that could provide business opportunities for the publishing community, new research opportunities for the scholars in our space. But that's matched with a fair dose of uncertainty and concern about how these tools will be handled, what the impacts will be, the expense of all of this, and how we'll manage, how we'll incorporate, and how we'll continue to do what we've always done while also doing all of the new things that we now have to do. And how do we manage all of that? There is also a significant amount of concern, not only in this community, but last week I was in Silicon Valley talking to tech companies about the challenges that are produced by artificial intelligence and Gen AI and fake and disinformation and misinformation, and how these tools can be used by malicious actors. And that was evident in the conversations yesterday. How do these technologies, how will these impact things like the trust and integrity of the scholarly record, which is really fundamental to what we exist to do in our community? And also a fair bit of caution in terms of, well, there's these great visions and we could do these amazing things, but let's be realistic about what we can do. And again, in sort of the scenario plannings that Cynthia and Leo talked about in their future scenario planning, there's a lot of potential risk. So let's be cautious and not break things as we're going about our managing this ecosystem. Other themes that I noticed yesterday have to do with the needs of our community. And a big need, as I see it, has to do with cultural shifts. We spent a fair bit of time yesterday talking about technology, and as an organization, I spend a lot of time talking about technology. But fundamentally, technology is never the problem. The technology causes cultural shifts, and those cultural shifts are what create barriers to adoption, create barriers to changes in our ecosystem. And managing those cultural shifts is more challenging than implementing some technology. And I'll get into that in a little bit in the next couple slides. Another element that came through as an underlying theme in this conversations yesterday have to do with education and skills development. What do people know about these tools, AI, machine language, learning tools? How do they apply in your institutions? How do these apply in the library community? And how many people have the technological skills to really work with them in a meaningful way? And how do we build those skills in our ecosystem? Particularly if you think that none of our organizations or very few of our organizations are going to be able to compete with large tech companies who are paying very high six-figure salaries for people who have expertise in machine learning models. And then a third need that I see has to do with regulation. And I don't mean regulation here in a DC perspective. I mean it more in the terms of guardrails, standards, best practices, but also an understanding of where the boundaries are and an understanding of what is right and wrong. Oftentimes those are norms of behavior, not necessarily legislated behavior. How are we going to police the use of AI, recognizing that people are going to use AI in putting together peer reviewer reports? But how do we say it's okay, but tell us that you're doing it, or use it in this particular case, or If you're doing the review and you're just using the AI tool to produce the peer review report, because that's another pain in the process, okay, maybe that's making that little element easier. But where do you draw the lines? What is acceptable? What is not? Don't just feed the paper into an LLM and say, give me a peer review report. I don't think that's what's happening. Maybe in a few cases, but I don't think that's what's happening writ large. But it does give us concern as we're thinking about these issues. So those were just Anita and my thoughts about the day yesterday. Later, we'll give you all an opportunity to think amongst yourselves and in a table conversation and report back. But I wanted to give, and Anita and I are each going to give a kind of our own glimpse into the future and the implications here. And you can use these to react as well in the conversations. So I just finished a book recently by 3 Canadian economists, Agrawal, Gans, and Goldfarb. This is published by Harvard Business Press. They're economists thinking about the impact of artificial intelligence. And as part of their thesis, they look at and think about technology from the perspective of point solutions versus platform solutions. These are economic approaches to looking at technological change. So a point solution is we're going to take a technology and we're going to apply it in a particular part of our business process. And they fix one element in your process, as opposed to a platform solution, which changes the entire process. And you rethink the entire process. And I'll give you an example here of a platform's point solution versus a platform solution. So back in the 19th century, there were textile mills. These were often powered by water power. This is actually a picture of the NISO office. As it appeared in the 19th century. It was an old sail factory. It was powered by the river. They manufactured the sails, put them on the river, put them down, took them to the harbor. It was powered by a water wheel initially, and throughout the mill, and this is not a picture of the mill, this is another picture of a mill, but you'll notice the flywheels, which were powered by belts. So you had one power source powering the entire factory, and they had a series of belts and levers, et cetera, that powered the machinery that was in the factory. All of the machines were generally on one side of that factory. Here's a schematic. This is from Lowell, which was another mill town in Massachusetts. These towns existed in the UK, et cetera. They all kind of had the same fundamental design, which is you had the power in one side of the building, you had the machines on one side of the building because that's where the power was. And they were multi-level because you could have different looms on one side of the building powered by the water mill on one side. And storage happened over there on the other side of the building. And it was all mechanical. In the late 19th century, there started to become electrification. So if you imagine you're a salesman of a new electronics company, I'm gonna walk into your textile mill and go, oh, I've got a generator. I'm gonna put, instead of the power wheel, you have an electric generator. That reduces your need for the water, what happens in a drought. You can turn the electric motors on, you can turn them off. That's a point solution. We've replaced the mechanical power of the water wheel with an electric motor. That's great, but it will only provide a small amount of savings. It's a marginal amount of savings. It doesn't radically transform the process of your textile mill. That's a point solution. What happened, and it took about 40 or 50 years for people to realize that what you could do with electric power was to distribute it, transform the process of creation, of manufacturing. And it took about 40 years for someone, Henry Ford, to distribute power, put it in different places in the manufacturing process. You are building this thing. We're going to move things around the factory. You don't need a 6-story building. You need a flat building. You have a process that takes things from that side of the room to that side of the room. And you have people with power at each individual spot. And you've radically transformed the productivity of the process. And so you have a radically different manufacturing system. You have a radically different manufacturing process. You have Ford manufacturing cars 20 times faster, 20 times better, more standardized, more efficient, more effective, and now everyone can buy a car. That's a radical transformation. We are now in the start of adopting and adapting to the possibilities of digital technologies, artificial intelligence just being the latest example of a digital technology that is transforming our landscape and transforming our business processes. And how are we as a community going to implement these tools and think creatively about them in this new ecosystem to create not just the marginal incremental improvements, but the radical transformations that will accelerate science and accelerate our community. So during the reception last night, I was explaining this talk to someone, and a publishing example here is back in the age of Gutenberg, we've been printing things with paper and movable type for centuries. Over the centuries, that process has improved. We've electrified it. Steam power, then electricity. We've even moved on to now digital publishing or digital printing. I worked at one of the first publishing houses I worked at was had implemented digital publishing technology, digital printing technology in the 90s. And they saved, double-digit savings on their manufacturing by basically having big photocopiers printing their journals. That is a marginal point solution. A radical implementation of that is thinking of printing as a digital ecosystem where the content is distributed around the world, and it's not that I have a digital print shop or I have a print shop that is digital. I can distribute around the world the printing so that I'm not printing in one place and shipping paper around the world. I'm printing it everywhere. That's one example of a systems shift that is radically different because of the technology and is a factor better than just using a digital printer and having 6 of them in one location. So as we think about artificial intelligence, what is artificial intelligence actually doing? And how can we leverage artificial intelligence? And are we simply replacing different elements of the publication process with point solutions? If we take artificial intelligence, yesterday one example was given, wouldn't it be great if we used artificial intelligence tools to check references instead of a human checking references? That's a point solution. Artificial intelligence is significantly better than humans at prediction. What are elements of the publication process that benefit from better prediction than humans? And science, better prediction in science than humans. Because we've been in this environment where we're just taking print and we're turning it into digital things, but we're not thinking more holistically about what taking them into digital world means. So what are we thinking about when we have a totally digitally native scholarly record? It's certainly more than this, which is just taking digital documents and putting them on different devices. We all do this. We all do this well. Someone mentioned yesterday, like, oh, we're already doing this. How come you're not more aware? Maybe we need to do a better job communicating with the researchers and the scholars. But I'm thinking more holistically, and I'd like us to push more holistically in this conversation and later today. What happens if we entirely rethink the publication process, the research process, not as we have done for the last several hundred years, but think of it holistically, systematically, atomized content, atomized elements of research, and sharing them, and also recombining and reconnecting them in really radically different ways to get that next generation of advances in terms of opportunity, of business success, of really fundamentally accelerating science, which is ultimately our goal. And this is where I'll pass to.
Thank you. So a few thoughts. I love this question. What about a digital native scholarly record? And I think yesterday there came up a plea to have an organization where we could talk better with librarians, funders, others. A while ago, a bunch of us started an organization called Force 11 in 2011, where we tried to do that. And there really the start was this question. And I think this question has been looked at from many different points by many different people. It's one that we can now come back to, I think, in all earnest and reconsider. And it'd be great if you all could reconsider that. So before you go into your groups, just one bit from me. I think it's interesting if we think again about how scholarly articles are written, how is science done? You start obviously with a problem. You then get money, hopefully you hire people, you start a lab, you run some methods, you gain some results, you're happy with them, data is produced, and you develop an assertion about these results. So you start with a conceptual idea, you then do a lot of experimental work on the ground with people, with mice, with stars, what have you, all the topics of science and scholarship, and you then condense them again into an article. And the article has artifacts such as data or software or things that are all connected to it. But you've kind of crammed this whole workflow into one document. But then these documents are read in a way that the reader has to pull them apart again. They may be looking at the assertion, why was this article written? They may want to actually only know what were the methods. How did they do this? How did they do that? What did they find? How come they found that? That's weird. Nobody else found that. Wait a minute. Somebody else did find it. Let me go read this reference. Okay, now I got to start at the beginning. What did they do? Why did they do it? So in every case, the way that we refer and the way that we invite our readers to access this content is for them to constantly have to wrap their thinking in an article format. Now, scientists and articles have co-evolved. It's kind of an evolutionary process. I always think it's a predator-prey relationship with a reviewer, where if you don't fit the mold, you're not going to outrun the reviewer, and you're not going to live as the gazelle in the scientific steps. But so the narrative structure and the way that language is used and the way that these methods are described have evolved. But there's no reason not to step back and not to think, wait a minute, maybe we can make it easier for researchers to stay closer to how their research is actually done. Maybe the article isn't the only way for them to access knowledge. So what if we allowed reading like this? You start within a set of assertions. computer scientists love cellular pathways because they think they look like triples. They're not quite, but they're kind of like it. But you can imagine some visualization, a map or a cellular pathway, a map of the brain, some representation, some knowledge representation. And within that knowledge representation, the article makes a number of assertions. And then those assertions, you can say, well, what are they based on? Here's an experiment. Here's what we did. Here's what we found. Here are the outcomes. Here are the methods. That might be one way to go. So we start from the network of assertions and we ask or we invite or we enable the authors to add their assertions to the network of known knowledge or the proposed knowledge. Or alternatively, we could allow reading like this. Maybe you want to start with the end. Maybe you want to start with the experimental outcomes. We want to find, the something coefficient of this material. Who else looked for those coefficients? What did they look like? Interesting. They're different. What was their method? How did that happen? Okay, why did they do this research? So maybe we can enable a way into the article, not starting from the conceptual question, not starting from the reason that the research was done, but simply by the experiments, by the things that were done, the material that were manipulated, the properties that were found, and the items that were studied. You can start with the star and say, what are all the things we know about the star? What are all the properties? And then go into the papers. So in other words, it's going back to Todd's atomization. How we do this, I think, is less interesting than what we do and why we do it. And engaging in conversations with our users, with our customers, with researchers, with scientists, with scholars about how they would like to have their research be supported. I think this is the time to do it. And then figuring out how to do it, I think, is going to be certainly much more easy now that we have an overwhelming amount of technologies. All right, so those were just some thoughts from me. And now what we'd like to do is to ask you all to consolidate so that there are, I'd say, at least 5 people to a table. And for the next 45 minutes, what we'd like to do is for the first 30 minutes to ask you all to discuss these 3 questions. And then we will take about 20 minutes to get feedback from some of the tables. So if you could move around, please introduce yourselves. And these are the 3 questions we have. Of course, you're welcome to discuss other topics. But what we'd like to do at the end of 30 minutes, after the introduction, after you've introduced yourselves, have discussed these points, is maybe to call on a couple of tables and ask them what stands out. We think, given the size of the room, we can't actually ask every single table, but we'll ask 4 or 5 and see how it goes. So thank you so much. That's it from us, and enjoy discussing. Thank you.